Book 3, Chapter 91, continuing with 49. The mind being cleansed of its darkness, like the mirror of its dirt, shows the golden color of spiritual light, replete with real joy, and by far more blissful than what this earthly clod of body can ever yield. We should cleanse the mind that exists forever, rather than the body, which is transient and non-existent, and which is as unreal as the trees living in the air, of which no one takes any notice. So this is very good advice. What this is saying is we must balance karmic traces on the deepest level in which they exist in this universe, in this body. If we balance them only on the level of the physical body, then whatever was the source of those traits that arose from into the physical body will just come back. But by balancing them on the level of the mind, in this case, referring to the Manomaya kosha, then they just come back. By reading Yoga Vasishta, while being established in the silent witness, that's exactly what we're doing, balancing karmic traces on the deepest level of mind. Hopefully, we are connecting with the silent witness on the level of Manomaya kosha. If we're not, that's fine. We are still balancing karmic traces, but perhaps on the level of pranamaya kosha, or even on the physical level. But at least we're making some good progress, and as we balance on these more superficial levels, it allows us to connect with deeper levels of the silent witness. So always we have progress being made. Those employed purifying their bodies under the impression that the body is also called the soul, Atman, or the atheistic Charvakas, who are like silly goats among men. Whatever one thinks inwardly in himself, he is truly transformed to its likeness. As in the example of the 10 Aindava Brahman sons, and like Indra and Ahalya cited before. Whatever is represented in the mirror of the mind, the same also appears in the figure of the body. But because neither this body nor anyone's ego lasts forever, it is right to forsake our desires. It is natural for everybody to think himself as an embodied being subject to death. There's like a boy who thinks he is possessed by a demon of his own imagination until he gets rid of his false belief by the aid of his reasoning. Chapter 92. A strong mind is unaffected by curses. Vashishta added, now hear, O support of Raghu's race, what I next asked of the lotus-born Brahma, after we had finished the preceding conversation. I asked him, saying, Lord, you have spoken before of the irrevocable power of curses. Then how is their power frustrated by men? We have witnessed the efficacy of curses pronounced with potent mantra anthemas to overpower the understanding and senses of living animals and paralyze every member of the body. The mind and body are as intimately connected with each other as motion with air and fluidity with a sesame seed. There is nobody except a creation of the mind. Like the fantasies of visions and dreams, and like the false sight of water in the mirage, or the appearance of two moons in the sky. Or else, why is it that the dissolution of one brings on the extinction of the other? Such as the quiet of the mind is followed by the loss of bodily sensation. Tell me, my Lord, how is the mind unaffected by the power of curses and menace that subdue the senses? Are mind and senses both overpowered by curses, being one and the same thing? Brahma replied, know that there is nothing in the treasure house of this world that man cannot attain by means of his efforts in the right way. All species of animal beings, from the state of the highest Brahma down to the minute insects, or bicorporal, they are endowed with two bodies, mental and physical. The mental body is always fickle and active. The other is the worthless body of flesh, which is dull and inactive. The fleshy body part that accompanies all animal beings is overpowered by the influence of curses and charms practiced by the art of incantation, avichara vidya. The influence of certain supernatural powers stupefies a man, making him dull and dumb. Sometimes one is about to droop down unconscious, as spellbound persons are deprived of their external senses and fall down like a drop of water from a lotus leaf. The mind, which is the other part of the body of embodied beings, is ever free and not subdued, though it is always under the subjection of all living beings in the three worlds. He who can control his mind by continued patience on one hand and by constant vigilance on the other is the man of an unimpeachable character and unapproachable by calamity. Well, let's look at this statement a moment. He who can control his mind. How do we control the mind? Well, we can control the mind by being beyond it. If we're inside the mind, if we think we are the mind, we can't control it, can we? Because we are the mind. Of course, that is an illusion and a fallacy. But if we connect with a silent witness, then it's easy. We can see the mind is there as the body, the subtle body, in this bicorporal body we have in this universe. The bicorporal, we're meaning physical and subtle. Physical is the Annamaya kosha and should be also connected with its energy source, which is the pranamaya kosha. So physical would be a combination of Annamaya kosha and pranamaya kosha. The subtle part would be Manomaya kosha and Vijnanamaya kosha. Once we connect with the silent witness, this is all obvious. Beforehand, it's all mysterious. Somehow we think we're the physical body. Then we learn about subtle bodies. We realize prana body is not physical body. And then we realize we are still trapped in a subtle body, Manomaya kosha. Ego wants to be free, so ego pretends I am the silent witness. But that doesn't do us any good. Ego pretending I'm the silent witness doesn't really work. It only works as long as people are observing. Because ego doesn't want to keep up some pretense if there's nobody to impress. As soon as the person is alone, he drops the pretense of being the silent witness. And then he's back to being trapped in mind, trapped in the physical body. But it's a good step to find the Manomaya kosha and the silent witness and attempting to connect with it, realizing that ego is going to try to claim that territory. We know that this is happening when we believe we're connected with the silent witness, but yet we're still thinking. As long as the mind is not at the state of simplest form of awareness, without any thought, then we have not arrived. We have not connected with the silent witness. We're only pretending to connect with the silent witness. But we have not arrived. When we arrive, it's quite obvious. Mind shuts up. Mind stops thinking. When the mind stops thinking, then we know we have arrived. Verse 15, the more a man employs the mental part of his body to its proper employment, the more successful he is in obtaining the object that he has in mind. Mere physical energy is never successful in any undertaking. It is only intellectual activity that is sure of success in all attempts. Focusing the mind in an effort to hurt objects unconnected with matter is as vain as trying to pierce a stone with an arrow. Drown the body underwater or dip it in mud, burn it in fire or fling it aloft in the air. Yet the mind turns not from its orientation. He who is true to his purpose is sure of success. Intensity of physical efforts overcomes all impediments, but only mental effort leads to ultimate success in every undertaking. Mark the examples of the fictitious Brahmin boy Indra, who employed all his thoughts to assimilate himself into the very image of his beloved, and drowned all his bodily pains in the pleasure of his thoughts of her. Think of the manly fortitude of Mandavya, who, when he was about to be beheaded, made his mind as detached as marble and was unconscious of his suffering. Think of the sage who fell into a dark pit while his mind was employed in some sacrificial rite. He was taken up to heaven in the reward of the merit of his mental sacrifice. So what does this mean? Mental sacrifice. Or how the sage fell into a dark pit while his mind was employed in a sacrificial rite. But what is this sacrifice? Sacrifice means giving up or doing without. But what are we giving up? What are we doing without? We're giving up our attachment to our bodies. When we do this, we naturally revert to being the silent witness. Remember also how the 10 sons of Indu, by virtue of their persevering tapas, obtained their status as Brahma, which even I have not the power to withhold. There have been many other such sages and masterminds among men and gods who never laid aside their mental energies, whereby they were crowned with success in their proper pursuits. No pain or sickness, no fulmination or threat, no malicious beast or evil spirit can break down the resolute mind any more than a lean lotus leaf striking can split the breast of a hard stone. Those of you who say you have been disturbed by tribulations and persecutions, I understand them as too infirm in their faith and very weak both in their minds and courage. Men with heedful minds have never been entrapped in the snare of errors in this perilous world. They have never been visited by the demon of despair in their sleeping or waking states. Therefore, let a man employ himself exercising his own manly powers and engage his mind and mental energy to noble pursuits in the paths of truth and holiness. The enlightened mind forgets its former darkness and sees its objects in their true light. The thought that grows big in the mind swallows it up at last, just as the imagination of a ghost lays hold of a child's mind. The new reflection effaces the prior impression from the tablet of the mind, just as an earthen pot turning on the potter's wheel thinks no more of its nature of dirty clay. The mind, O Muni, is transformed in a moment to its new model. Just like infatuated water rises high into waves, spray, and foam, glaring with reflections of sunlight. The mind, adverse to right investigation, sees like the blind everything in darkness, even in broad daylight, and observes by deception 2 moons, or 1 in the moonshine. Whatever the mind has in view, it soon succeeds in accomplishing. Whether it does anything of good or evil, it reaps the reward accordingly in the gladness or bitterness of his soul. A wrong reflector reflects a thing in a wrong light, just as a distracted lover sees a flame in moonbeams, which makes him burn and consume in his state of distraction. It is the conception of the mind that makes salt seem sweet to taste by its giving a flavor to the salted food for our zest and delight. It is our conception that makes us see a forest in the fog or a tower in the clouds, appearing to the sight of the observer to be rising and falling by turns. In this manner, whatever shapes the imagination gives to a thing, it appears in the same form before the mind's sight. Therefore, knowing this world of your imagination to be neither a reality nor unreality, stop seeing it and its various shapes and colors as they appear to view. So this power of imagination, very important, isn't it? Whatever the shape the imagination gives to a thing, it appears in the same form before the mind's sight. So we use this power of imagination for what purpose? We use it to manifest the opposite of the karmic traces that we're looking to balance. And this we do on all levels. We're creating 1,000 communities around the world using literally our imagination. When these communities arise, it's going to be a strong counterbalance to the individual collective karmic traces of humanity that have created all sorts of human architecture, all sorts of structures in the world that are not in alignment with the divine karmic traces. Because the one thing that our communities will be, above all, is in perfect alignment with the divine karmic traces. As physical structures, they're going to be perfect examples of manifested divine karmic traces. So they're going to be really quite beautiful, because that's our standard of beauty. Whatever was created by divine karmic traces is the standard of beauty. And these communities are going to be a standard of beauty of the divine karmic traces. And that will balance all of the individual karmic traces that have given manifestation to various structures on it. For example, our communities will be examples of extreme prosperity, because there's nothing more prosperous, there's nothing of greater wealth than the wealth generated by the divine karmic traces. Wealth generated by human action is hollow and false, empty. It's called fiat currency. It's just something that's declared to exist by governments. And what are governments? they are also imaginary, egoistical formations of the egos of unenlightened beings. So governments don't really exist either. And their money does not really exist either. What exists from the perspective of being within this universe is what is generated directly by divine karmic traces. When the 1 million people inhabit these beautiful celestial structures, they're going to be literally celestial structures existing in the physical realm. Hard for us to imagine how incredibly beautiful they're going to be. But they are going to be like beautiful gems scattered around the earth, setting a new standard for beauty and architecture. Because they are going to be formed of pure divine karmic traces. So when these 1,000 communities are inhabited by 1 million people, 1 million people living within divine karmic trace structures are going to be influenced by that. You know, there's a science of Vastu explained in the Vedic literature. And understand the Vedic literature is the recording of the knowledge of Kali Yuga. And so Vastu is a way in which we can physically attempt to create celestial structures that resonate perfectly and are perfect expressions of divine karmic traces. So we're given these incredible rules for how to create the perfect Vastu. And when we have accomplished it, it gives us an experience when we go into these structures. Because all of the energy flows are in perfect balance. That means they are lively with devas in all of the three chakras. And this liveliness of the Sri Chakra of the structure has the ability to give us an experience of peace, tranquility, and the silent witness as we are inhabiting these structures. So our communities are going to literally enforce or allow the residents of the communities to feel this wonderful silent witness in the structure itself. This will create an elevation of their individual consciousness. And that elevation of the individual consciousness of the members of the community is going to spread out, touching the consciousness of the entire humanity. Balancing the karmic traces in the immediate vicinity, like a light chases away darkness in a dark room. When you bring a light into a dark room, it is balancing the negativity, the lack of light that exists in that room. When you bring 1 million enlightened individuals into the collective consciousness of humanity, going to balance all of the individual karmic traces that are keeping everyone else from the experience of enlightenment. This is why Krishna says, when he was predicting this over 5,000 years ago, he said the world will be filled with my devotees. So what does that mean? That means everyone is going to be connected with the silent witness, both inside and outside the communities. That's why this is going to be a period of heaven on earth, a celestial period in the physical realm, where the divine karmic traces, instead of being in the background and hidden under mountain ranges of individual karmic traces, celestial divine karmic traces will be in the foreground. Going to be quite the amazing experience. Chapter 93, Brahma as the mind. A view of the genesis of the mind and body. Vasishtha said, Brahma, I will now tell you what Lord Brahma himself taught me long ago. From the unspeakable Brahma, there sprang all things in their indefinable ideal state. Well, this is a perfect expression of what we've been talking about. The divine karmic traces represent all things in their indefinable ideal state. This is what we're helping to bring into the physical three-dimensional universe. This is not a fantasy on that level. It is a fantasy, of course, on the highest level of consciousness where all is illusion. But those who are living in this universe will be exposed to indefinable ideal state of everything. Then the Spirit of God, being condensed by his will, came to be produced of itself in the form of the mind. The mind formed the notions of the subtle elementary principles in itself and became a personal agent. It became a luminous body and was known as Brahma, the first male, Purusha. Therefore, know this same Brahma is situated in the supreme Parameshti, and being a personification of the will of God is called the mind. Therefore, the mind, known as Lord Brahma, is a form of divine essence, and being full of desires in itself, sees all that it wills in their indefinable ideal forms present before it. The mind then framed or fell of itself into the delusion of seeing its ideal images as substantial. Therefore, it is said that the world of phenomena is the work of Brahma. The world proceeds in this order from supreme essence. This is why some suppose that its dull material particles came into being from another source. It is from that Brahma, O Ram, that all things situated in this concave world are in being, like waves rising on the surface of the deep. The self-existent Brahma that exists in the form of consciousness, Chit, before creation, assumes the attributes of egoism, ahamkara, and becomes manifest in the person of Brahma. All the other powers of consciousness that are concentrated in the personality of ego are equivalent to those of omnipotence. The world being evolved from the eternal ideas in divine consciousness manifests itself in the mind of the great Father of all, Brahma. The mind, thus moving and modeling all things, is called the individual soul, Jiva. These individual souls rise and move about in the empty sphere of infinite consciousness, Chid Akasha. These unfold by the elementary particles of matter and pass into the open space surrounded by air. Then they reside in the 14 kinds of animated nature, according to the merit and demerit of their prior acts. They enter bodies through the passage of their vital breath and become the seeds of moving and immovable being. They are born of the generative organs and are suddenly met with the desires of their previous births. Thus, led on by the currents of their wishes, they live to reap the reward or retribution of their good or bad acts in the world. Thus, bound fast to the action and fettered in the meshes of desire, individual souls, enchanted in their bodies, continue to rove about or rise and fall by turns in this changeful world.